We're going to embark on one of the most influential times in Western art history, and that is the Renaissance. The question that we're exploring is, what was the Renaissance and how did it influence art and culture? Now, one thing I love about Core Knowledge is that you'll be exploring the same question in music and also in CKC. Just so you know, Renaissance is a French word, renaissance, that means rebirth. And when we talk about the Renaissance, we're talking about a rebirth of Greek and Roman classical art. They're kind of the golden standard. After Greek and Roman classical art diminished, we had what's commonly known as the Dark Ages. However, we'll discover in art history they were not entirely dark, but there is a return to the ideals of Greek and Roman classical art. You're going to be filling out a note catcher sheet, and you'll notice that there are these boxes. In the boxes are the words that you need to fill out each one of the blanks. Feel free to pause as needed. So the revival of trade in Europe helped bring an end to the Middle Ages or the medieval times and gave rise to the Renaissance. You can see all these different travel routes opening up this region again. Increased trade gave rise to Italian city-states and a wealthy middle class of bankers and merchants. You can see here that there were these regions, and the one that's probably the most famous is Florence. You can visit Florence today and still see, hundreds of years later, the influence of this very important family. Repeat after me like an Italian person, the Medicis. I hope your hands are moving if you really want to be Italian. So the Medicis were a very influential family. They controlled Florence and Europe's largest bank, and they were also really interested, like maybe some people in America too, kind of showing off their wealth. And one of the ways that they did this was through some really fancy art and trying to make their city one of the most beautiful in the world. So here we are, wealthy bankers and merchants wanted to show off their new status by commissioning art. So they would actually call artists from different parts of the country. I shouldn't say call because it wasn't really a telephone call, but they would send people to give a message to these artists, and they would offer to pay for their life, to pay them a salary. This was unheard of for artists to make money like this, to make beautiful buildings, portraits, and spaces. The rise of cities brought artists together, which led to new techniques and styles of art. You can imagine you bring all these really talented artists and innovative artists. They're not limited to just visual arts. You bring them all together and you just say, hey, we're going to cover everything for you. Please just make art. Well, they put their heads together and you're going to see a lot of innovation and change comes from their conversations and connections. The most important Italian city-state was Florence. In this wealthy trade city, the Renaissance began. Here is what it looks like back in the day. Now, it's interesting, if you visit Florence, it still has a very similar feel. Now, you'll notice that there is a feature in this painting that makes Florence especially great for trading. Did you notice the river that runs right through? That makes it kind of an ideal place for trade to happen. And remember, trade isn't just goods. Trade can also be the exchange of ideas and inventions, and that's really important in the Renaissance. Florence was home to the Medici family, the wealthiest and most powerful bankers in Europe, and they used their wealth to commission art for themselves and to beautify Florence. And you can still see that today. It is a beautiful city, and there are many buildings and paintings and areas that are designed to really show off the city. These are some of the portraits of the Medicis. I got to see a number of these, and there were portraits done of all the family. Now, we might think it's kind of strange to have these paintings, but remember, there wasn't really another option. There were no photographs, there were no selfies. The only way to have a record of what you look like was to commission an artist and pay a significant amount of money to have a painting done. So you can imagine it was just the wealthy and the famous who had paintings of themselves. This is the humble Medici Palace. Oh my goodness, check out those 3 levels, the courtyard. You can visit the Medici Palace, and then you can see they even have their own chapel. So they were Catholic, and you can see there's an altar and this beautiful space for them to pray or receive the Eucharist, which would be like communion. Now, this is pretty bold if you ask me. Lorenzo de' Medici commissioned this painting from Botticelli of the Medici brothers as the 3 magi. So because they were Catholic, you're going to notice that many of the images depicted are from the Bible. So if you happen to have a background in Catholicism or Christianity, this is going to look very familiar. So this is when Mary and Joseph have had Jesus, and there are people visiting the family bringing gifts. Now, in particular, there are 3 kings, and we talk about them sometimes at Christmas time, and they're known as the 3 magi who followed the stars to find the Star of Bethlehem where Jesus was located. Now, what's kind of bold about this is that the Medici said, hey, we're willing to pay you money to paint this scene, but by the way, we want you to paint our faces as the 3 magi. Now, the 3 magi, we really don't know what they look like, but Botticelli went ahead and painted the 3 brothers. And you'll notice, check it out, Botticelli paints himself into the scene as well. So famous forever. Medici's paid to build a massive dome cathedral for Florence, and this is definitely a feature in the city. There are really long lines, and this is a more modern picture, so you can see some of the traditional look of the area. You can go and tour this beautiful cathedral. Let's move on to here. So out of the Renaissance comes some new styles and techniques. First of all, there is realism and emotion. There is the return, as I mentioned before, to classicism or inspiration from the Greeks and the Romans. Now, when we look at classic art, I'm sure you've noticed by now, there is nudity in the art. It's important to remember why. So during this time, there is a return to an idea called humanism. And this is where people, artists, the culture of the time is really elevating humans. Like, check us out. We are amazing mathematicians. Check us out. We design incredible buildings. Check us out. We have glorious bodies. And so you will see throughout the Renaissance and some of the other time periods that we talk about, that there is some nudity. I would ask you just to be mature about that. So this is a famous Greek sculpture called the Discus Thrower, and this is one of the most famous sculptures from the Renaissance of a king from the Old Testament called David. There is an emphasis on individuals and interactions between people. This is an image from Roman mythology. And you'll also notice the development of this idea of arranging art geometrically. So you can definitely see those three triangles within a larger triangle and being really intentional about how figures or people in the paintings are pictured. They're not just in a lineup like you'll see a lot of times in medieval art. And last, you can see the use of perspective. We're going to be talking about this in the elements of art when we talk about space. You can see the vanishing point here draws your eye back and creates the illusion of space. You can see also the figures. This is I think it's called the betrothal of Mary. So it's kind of like when Mary and Joseph are promised to each other to be married. And you can see the figures here in the forefront are large, medium-sized toward the middle ground, and tiny toward the background. So the artists are using these techniques to create the illusion of a 3D space. You can also see overlapping. The figures in the front overlap the figures behind. So this, up until this time, was not something that people had figured out yet. And it really improved the realism